We'll just give it a few more moments until we've just got the last of the people that are joining. Looks like a relatively quiet session today, but we are recording today's session. If you've been on previous sessions for responding well to conflict, this is going over the information that you had there, and it is also to go alongside the longer sessions that your teams will hopefully have attended or will be attending to help them through any conflict that they are having to deal with within the GP surgery situation. So we'll just give it a couple of moments if that's okay, and just to note that we are recording this session. Okay, I think we can at least start to go through your basic housekeeping for the session today. You can choose whether you want to have your cameras on or off, but just do be aware that we are recording the session. So if your camera is on, it will note anything that you are doing while you are watching the session. So just keep that in mind. Do make sure you are on mute, because we will get lots of feedback that comes through and that can distort any recording of the session. And obviously, when this has been recorded, it will be uploaded to the GP Excellence website. So there will be a recording available should you want to go back over anything. After the session, you will get a certificate for attending the session that will come out from GP Excellence. It doesn't come out from me. And along with various documentation that you may find useful, and I believe a copy of the slides, but that will come directly through from GP Excellence. This goes alongside longer sessions that have been made available for your teams to attend. If you are unsure about those, I've just popped into the chat how you can get hold of GP Excellence to double check and find out when those sessions are taking place. If you want some of your teams to attend a session on how to respond well to conflict, please do feel free to contact them and ask. And once again, this is being recorded. There is nobody here monitoring the chat for me, so if you do ask questions, it may just take me a few moments to get to those questions. So I'll just start with a who am I? If you haven't attended my sessions before, my name is Luann, and I am a practice manager who's worked in lots of different places over the years. Why on earth does that matter? Well, actually it does to this, because some of those different places have had very different attitudes and items of conflict compared to others. And it's just interesting to see the different way people react when they have been in very violent areas compared to not so violent areas. And it is worth working through that. And we will do as we work through today's session. I have recently retired, although found myself bounced straight back into a GP surgery, as practice managers often are, because I am locuming, helping someone through their CQC who have just recently failed their CQC and trying to get them back on track. I'm also a group mentor and an individual mentor and trainer for Lancashire Training Hub, and also for Manchester GP Excellence, as I'm here today. And I am a professional associate for the LMC, a consultant in estates and finance. Quite busy for someone who's apparently retired, but I am fully retiring in March, so you will no longer have to see me teaching these sessions, and hopefully they'll have found somebody else to take over from that. So today's subject is responding well to conflict and what we need to do to help our teams. So there is a full long training, 3-hour training roughly for frontline staff, also a good idea for managers to attend. And then this particular training is more focused on management, which is, of course, all the exciting side of form filling, working out we've got the right paperwork done, and also, of course, looking after our teams, as we need to do in these stressful situations when they have had to deal with conflict within the workplace. When we look at the training and what is covered, it's up there for you. So we look about why conflict is becoming more common. a few psychological theories, impact of our environment and how to identify risks, real life situations that our staff can find themselves in, different conditions that can cause clinically induced behaviours, stress and how that affects us in the workplace, any coping strategies, recognising signs of escalation and de-escalation techniques, unconscious bias and how that can change a situation, how to seek help and signposts for support. And we are going to look at the different impact on our environment and how we can make things go a little bit better, and how to look at different actions when things have really gone too far. We do delve briefly into some of the theory, and that's just to give us a little bit of understanding, and that's something that you can choose to share with your staff as you feel is appropriate. There was a survey done. It was in 23-24, so I'm quite sure there's probably some new surveys that are going to be looked at soon within this, but it was done by IGPM, and I'm sure most of you know who IGPM are. They have just finally got a seat at the table to look at our next contract. So hopefully they are becoming bigger and better across the country and a bit more well known. But IGPM did a survey that was open to all managers during the autumn of 2023. So we're going back 2 years ago now, to just look at how managers felt that patients' behaviours had deteriorated since the pandemic. And over 80% of managers did actually feel that patients had deteriorated within their behaviour, and around 95% then felt that there were more unreasonable expectations from patients now compared to back pre-COVID. And when that happens, and patients feel that they have more and more expectations, then unfortunately they are more likely to become nasty and therefore or potentially violent when they don't get their own way. And 23% of managers back in 2023 reported that someone in their practice had been the subject to actual physical abuse from a patient in the previous 12 months. Unfortunately, I think that's on the rise. I think there's more and more patients who feel they can actually put hands on our staff. They feel it's their right, and that's obviously something that we need to learn how as managers to de-escalate those issues and to help people. So why is it getting worse? Well, there's an increase in expectations in everything. This isn't just for our GP surgeries, it is everything. And it's kind of been sort of dubbed the Amazon effect, which is that, I'm sure all of you have done this, you can sit scrolling on your screen on Amazon, press a button, order something, and sometimes it's there on the same day. Sometimes you have to wait till the next day, but that's as long as you have to wait. It gives people that instant gratification. But obviously there isn't the money in the NHS budget to have an endless supply of appointments to give patients that instant gratification. So that's making everyone a little bit more grumpy. We have a lot of rates of dissatisfaction and complaints are rising and rising. And that's because not that we've got any worse, but quite often we just cannot give them what they're demanding because it's unrealistic. This gives them our reduction in our ability to meet their expectations, makes them more and more angry, and therefore we are having this more and more violent reaction. Now, sometimes this could be because there's more elderly people now, the population is constantly rising, so maybe more people do actually need our services. There is definitely more long-term conditions happening, which gives more requests for appointments, and people's expectations for being rapid and instant has got worse. But also there are other problems that are happening. Retaining staff is getting harder. We don't always keep those same staff that have that background knowledge, so things might take a little bit longer. And we've also all had those patients that are very, very demanding. You know, I've had a headache for 4.5 minutes. I want somebody to solve it right now. And therefore, they don't self-care. They don't look after themselves. They expect somebody else to deal with it straight away. And this causes more and more aggravation for our frontline reception staff team. And it's our job to try and sort out and help them, because conflict is growing. And it is actually quite interesting to know that those of you that went through the pandemic, which there was probably quite a few managers still out there that were working during the pandemic. I know I certainly did. They've now looking back on what happened during the pandemic, and they've actually taken a professor who's called Lucy Easthope, who specialises in disaster recovery, and looked at all different research work around national and international disasters such as Hillsborough, and really severe trauma, things that add trauma to people for years and years to come. And they actually believe that the pandemic is going to do this to many people. So the harm of the pandemic will be experienced for anywhere between 10 to 30 years after the pandemic. So we are still only a small part into that. We were sort of 4 or 5 years on from now. And they believe that primary care is going to be hit harder than anything else because of the way people's mental health have become after going through lockdowns, losing people. It's changed the way people think and feel. And that means we are seeing a lot more mental health. So certainly this particular professor is looking at this as a national disaster. With the pandemic, and that it is going to have a long-term effect on all of us, and particularly those people that are our patients that are turning up and needing help. When also the staff are probably going to have a little bit of pushback and think, well, we were the frontline disaster responders. We have been there and we worked through that. So there is that immediate clash, which we need to sort of start working through and get our teams on track to deal with all of these problems. So when this training was set up, and this isn't my training, I've just been asked to deliver it, it was believed that it would be really important for you as managers to understand a little bit about what's going on in our patients' heads, and really what the situations are, and what that makes us feel, and what it makes our patients feel, to make sure that we understand what's going on. Because if we understand what they're going through, perhaps this will help us a little bit to deal with different things. So when we have a situation, that's what we see, what we hear, everything going on around us. Then we go into our thoughts, which are guided by our beliefs and our values. So your beliefs and values may be very different to mine, or very different to a different patient, depending on what's happened to us in our past. So one situation can feel extremely different from one of your team members to another team member. Then we have our feelings, whether we're a particularly emotional person, and how that might feel to us. And our feelings can all be different because we're all very different people. And then we have our behaviours, which are generated by our feelings. And that is a circle that keeps going round. So basically, two people can be experiencing the exact same thing, but it's very unique to us on how we may react to that. And this is something you need to be aware of with your team, which I know is really hard because we've got so much to do as managers. But basically, our thoughts and beliefs and values mean that one situation can seem so much more stressful to someone else. And we must be very careful not to think that because we're working in perhaps a real leafy area that's really nice and somebody's just slightly raising their voice, that might be extremely stressful to our receptionist compared to somewhere else where something perhaps a lot more violent may be occurring, and actually the staff members are coping more because they see it all the time. That doesn't actually make it better that they're coping more. Sometimes they're holding that stress within. But we've got to understand our teams and balance with them and understand that sometimes things can be really, really hard for a staff member, even if it doesn't seem like a terrible situation to us, because don't forget, we're normally sat up in a room and it's not happening right in front of us. So as managers, we and our staff are aware that a situation can happen and make us feel very, very different to each other. And some of that is those feelings of fear, humiliation, frustration, felt by our patients or felt by us or our staff members. And it can make a real impact on us, even if it doesn't seem that dramatic to you. So unfortunately, we've got to also learn to do that sort of psychological bit of listening to our staff and trying to understand if something is really hard for them, why that might be. And I remember for me, it was a big learning thing. As any of you've been on my training will know, I normally bring in my situations that have happened to me. It was the first time I went from what was the second most violent practice in the whole of the country, which was the practice, one of the practices I was running. We had to be escorted to our cars every day by security because it was dangerous for us to walk from the practice to our car without fear of being attacked. And then I went and worked in a very leafy practice. And when I was at that extremely leafy practice, one of the girls said to me, "Oh my goodness, you're going to meet our most violent patient. Are you really scared? Do you need me to be with you?" And I said, "I'm sure I'll be fine." And the gentleman came up. He said to me, "Good afternoon, how are you?" He shook my hand. We had a nice chat, off he went. And I thought, how can this be the most violent patient? And the girl concerned said, "Well, once he pushed a chair and it fell over." And that to her had frightened her. She'd gone home feeling very stressed. And I almost laughed out loud thinking, that's mad. How can that be scary? But I had to rein it in and think, well, to her, he was quite unpleasant and a stressful man who had upset her day. And actually, when I go back to my quite violent, my very violent Blackpool practice, the girls didn't react to anything, because we were so used to patients coming in with weapons, used to patients threatening us, used to being escorted by security, that we were almost numb to it. And that's not good. But there wasn't that stress there. And I was seeing more stress over something that was so tiny that had happened. And sometimes that makes us realize that we've got to look at the situation and understand our staff and understand what they are going through. And even if it seems something trivial, we do need to be aware. So when we think about our beliefs and values, and I absolutely love this slide, and I definitely didn't write it, because a receptionist values their job, believes it's important to do a good job, values being able to help patients, believes it's important to follow procedures and adhere to practice rules, and values being part of a team. And that's all lovely. I'd love that receptionist. Most of mine value the money that they're going to get at the end of the month, and that's why they want to do the job. But this is the values that the receptionist is hopefully having, as well as wanting her money. But the patient's values and belief, well, maybe they value their job. They don't want to take time off work to turn up for an appointment and then find out that the appointment's running late. I think the receptionist really shouldn't be asking them what's wrong. We all know that care navigation helps them get to the right person, but a lot of patients are getting really angry about it. They believe the receptionist could really offer them a GP appointment, but they're choosing not to, that they've got this abundance of appointments. They, of course, value the opinion of a GP, and that's why we can watch them sometimes shout and scream at our receptionists, and it's a whole different person that goes in and sits in front of the GP. And they really believe that being signposted to the pharmacy is fobbing them off. So we know that we are automatically getting into that situation where we can feel that things feel really challenging for our staff, because before they've even uttered a word, they are coming in from conflicting ways, and they are going to have to try and work through those conflicting ways to manage to work together and resolve the problem, which is normally just getting someone an appointment for what they needed. Some of you hopefully have seen the IGPM video, which came out, I think it was about 18 months ago, on what a receptionist goes through. It's a really good video, quite worth showing on your Facebook pages or websites, or even up in your surgery, because sometimes seeing the terrible behaviour that patients can throw at receptionists can be a good reminder for them that perhaps that's not the way to behave. If anyone wants to comment or discuss that, please feel free to. If you are quite happy to sit and listen to me, then also that's fine too. So when we were looking at what feelings trigger conflict, we have a fear to our response to a perceived threat. We can have humiliation, so circumstances that make us feel inferior, and we can have frustration when systems can't meet our needs, things that can make us frustrated and then angry, and that's what our patients are going through. And different circumstances can influence our thoughts and our feelings, and that can make things feel different. Now, when I talked about my Blackpool surgery and the concerns that sometimes happen there when I'm trying to work through how stressful things are, I actually had a situation with a young lady who, it took another team member coming to tell me that my reception staff member had decided to walk without security to her car. She had been grabbed, held up against a wall, and had had a threat of rape. She hadn't reported it to the police. She hadn't even come to me, because she said, these things happen here. He probably wouldn't have raped me. It was really frightening to see that a 19-year-old girl had become so numb to the violence that was happening around her that she didn't even feel the need to report it. Luckily, one of the other team members had seen it and reported it, and I brought her in and we worked through how that should have made her feel, what we could do to assist her, how we could keep her safe in the future, and what we should do about reporting things like that to the police. So sometimes your staff need your backing, and to understand that actually when things are really bad, that's the time that they really need to, you need to step up rather than wait for them to you, because it really isn't okay. Sometimes we need to think of ourselves as different types of leaders as well. And I saw a very good thing on wartime leaders. War leaders in COVID that were fighting through everything and trying to work through all the problems. And when the problems dissolved, they found it more difficult to lead in those situations. And sometimes you have to work through and change your rationale and your beliefs to make sure that if you are a wartime leader, that you can also lead in peacetime and watch out and make sure that things are happening around you. I say that because I am also one of these managers who has always jumped from place to place because I'm a problem solver. I enjoy the problem rather than the peace. But sometimes when the peace is happening, we can miss that there are bits of war happening too that we need to look after and help our teams through. We do need to understand that when our patients come into our building, they may associate the building with a past traumatic event. It might be that this is where they found out the news that their loved one was perhaps not going to make it, had been put on end of life. It may be somewhere they had got a really bad diagnosis. And so they may already feel traumatic when they come into the building. It does suggest if they have access to amenities, it can make things better. Vending machines, access to water, play areas. Again, this wasn't written by me, and having worked in a very, very challenging area before, we had to be very careful what was put around because anything could be a potential weapon. So only you know your surgeries and you know what is best for those amenities. We certainly couldn't have had a water machine for patients in one of my surgeries, but we could bring someone a cup of water if required. So you need to work what happens around you. And I remember being extremely shocked going into a surgery and seeing a fish tank, which was super calming for all the patients. And it was an absolutely lovely thing to have. I know if I'd had that in my Blackpool surgery, someone would have either eaten the fish or smashed the fish tank and used it for a weapon. So we need to be really careful, and only we know our own surgeries. But our patients should have access to a private consultation area if they do need to speak to you or your staff to tell you something embarrassing. They shouldn't have to come out with it in front of everybody. You should have posters and signs that make people feel comfortable. We need to realise that there could be parking or transport issues getting into the surgery. People could be stuck in traffic, so they might come in wound up a little bit, and to try and understand that. Clinicians running late can make them cross and make them angry before they've even started. Being kept in a long queue, out of order signs on the toilet doors so nobody can use the toilet. And some people get really cross about remote consultation. So these are all the things that are going through some of their minds, that we then are stuck with someone who's angry before they even start speaking to you. And that's not for you to solve, but sometimes if you're aware of that, it can help you to understand what's going on. I'm going to make you work now. So those of you that are sat half watching this while you're doing a little bit of work, you are going to have to wake up a little bit. These are 3 posters, and these are posters that some tests have done, and thinking that perhaps they generate different thoughts within people. So we're going to call this one up here, Abuse is Not in a Day's Work. We're going to call that poster A. We are here to help you. Thank you for treating us with respect. That is poster B. And then poster C, your choice of treatment, with the pictures of various people, and stop abuse of NHS staff. That's poster C. Which of these do you feel would generate the best reaction out of the majority of your patients? Poster A, abuse is not in a day's work. Poster B, we're here to help you. Or poster C, stop abuse. Poster B for most of you. Yeah, poster B. Now, poster B is supposed to definitely be the better poster for helping our patients settle in and not feeling violent and aggressive the moment they come in. Because if they're already feeling annoyed and uptight and angry when they come in through things that may not be any help, anything that you can do anything about, if they come in and see slightly more aggressive posters, that can actually make things worse. So as much as sometimes we may want to say, stop abusing the staff, this is what can happen, you could be prosecuted, actually that's not going to get the best reaction out of your patients. You are far better to start with something more gentle, and poster B is classed as definitely the better one for you to be using within your surgery. I have done these sessions where people say, well, in my surgery, I need these stop abuse, and I can understand that as well. But definitely, if you can go in more gently, you are going to get a better reaction out of people. So the government has decided that they are going to try to move away from the wording of zero tolerance. We all have seen the zero tolerance of violence towards our staff. And what they are trying to change it into is a more violence prevention and reduction strategy. So we are trying to look at things to sound a little less aggressive, to actually help and make things seem a little calmer, because if we can keep everything calm. So that doesn't mean abuse is acceptable, it isn't. And it doesn't mean that we can't have almost a zero tolerance within our surgery, but it does mean that we do need to start thinking about the actual patient concerned, the problems they are going through, how our staff have responded, and how we can look at things to make sure that we are calming the situation, because zero tolerance can be seen to put blame solely on those that are displaying violence and abuse. So it puts us into a them and us, whereas actually it's not always them and us. Sometimes it's a situation that's flared between your staff member and the particular patient. Sometimes it's nothing to do with any one of those people. It is just something that's within them. This could be mental health. It could be poorer health. Social outcomes can make things different. And it's something, if we have a little bit of understanding around, it can actually make us understand those people a bit better. And then we react better so it doesn't inflame them. So when we have this full 3-hour training, the staff are asked to think about clinical conditions that can make someone's behaviour appear inappropriate. So here's a few examples on here, like depression, anxiety, psychosis, dementia, learning disabilities, autism, ADHD, and severe fatigue. Quite a good idea if you have the time to do it, and all of your staff maybe haven't had the time to attend this training, to do a bit of an exercise in a staff meeting. Get one of your GPs, if they haven't raced off somewhere, to give a bit of insight into each condition, what type of things that these patients may see within these conditions and how that may make them react. So it gives our staff a little bit more understanding. A lot of these problems may be listed on our clinical system. But there are also traumatic childhood events can have a really big impact on someone's behaviour as an adult. And that's something that won't necessarily flag up on your clinical system. So when we think back to children, a child is completely reliant on its caregiver. So that could be a parent, it could be a grandparent. They are completely reliant when they're babies. So if they've been growing up with parents who are abusive or neglectful, it wires the brain of a child and changes the way that child's going to behave as they get older, which can lead to long-lasting patterns of emotional and psychological distress that carries on into adulthood. And then when they react with other people, they behave strangely. So adverse childhood experiences are known as ACEs. And this is a highly stressful and potentially traumatic event or situation that occurred during childhood or adolescence. It could be a single event. It could be they've seen a parent murdered. It could be prolonged events of being beaten or things happening to them. And that can affect the way they behave for the rest of their life. So ACEs cause a relational injury within someone. And that can affect all relationships. And that can be a relationship such as the patient-reception relationship. They may mistrust people that are in so-called positions of power who are there to decide whether they can have an appointment or not, because maybe they felt let down by a health visitor or somebody that's come into the home to supposedly help when a situation's got out of control and maybe hasn't, like a social worker. All sorts of things like that can change the way they feel. Doesn't mean our receptionists have to put up with not being treated right, but it does mean that they maybe have a little bit of an understanding of what's going on from that person. So examples of ACEs is abuse, which can be physical, sexual, or emotional, neglect, living with a drug user or an alcoholic, exposure to domestic violence. They often say that if you've been abused, many people who are abused go on to be abusers, or many people who have been in a situation with parents who have domestic violence go on to cause domestic violence in their own relationships. So it does affect the psyche. If you've lived with someone who's gone to prison, lived in poverty, and I mean real poverty, not you can't have the latest thing that's gone on sale from somewhere, but actual poverty where you don't know where the next meal's coming from. Living with someone with a severe mental illness, losing parents through divorce, death, or abandonment, and they are now considering that the COVID-19 pandemic should actually be classed as an ACE. So most of us will have lived through COVID-19. So in the UK, nearly 50% of people have experienced one ACE within their life. but there's only 9 to 12% of people who have had 4 or more. Now, if you've had 4 or more of these type of things that have happened to you, you're more likely to develop significant health conditions in later life, such as heart disease, diabetes, and dementia. If you've had one of these ACEs, apart from COVID-19, think about how that's changed you. If you've perhaps had a parent who has abused drugs, or if you've been through losing a parent, all of those things could have happened to your staff. So that is going to get their reactions up. So if they've got 1 ACE and your patient has got 2 or 3, that can make clashes start to happen. And we do need to keep this in mind. Now, not everyone who's experienced an ACE will have difficulty on fostering relationships in later life. It won't affect everybody, but it may affect them. And it's just to give us a little bit of an idea on what's going on through people. And there was a study done in England that said who people have experienced 4 or more ACEs were 3 times more likely to end up living in the deprived areas. So inequality really does matter. So those of you that are working in areas of high deprivation, that will increase your chances of having more abusive patients or more violence regularly within your surgeries. And then we definitely need to know how to deal with that. So as a manager, when do we get involved? So sometimes we're brought into a situation during an event. Someone may run into your room and say, oh, this patient's kicking off, run, come, you need to come right now. Sometimes it's immediately after the patient's still in the building, but the actual shouting and screaming has stopped. Sometimes we don't find out till later that day, or even the next day, when someone will come in and tell you, oh, what about when that happened? But sometimes we could do things before the event. So if we start thinking before the event, things like making things safer for our staff, working to get through things so that they feel more comfortable at work, we can stop some of these events happening. And we need to think about our staff's stress, because although many of us can thrive on some level of stress, but if you get too stressed, you will definitely start to have a tipping point. And that will make us not come to work, which will be then more stressful for other people. So this isn't just you, this is all of your staff. And we need to start spotting the signs when our staff are motivated, happy, but maybe a little bit stressed, to that tipping point where they really can't cope and they're going through mental, physical, or emotional breakdown. Because if they're extremely stressed, they are more likely to overreact to a patient, which is going to cause that clashing, which causes some problems. So employers have a legal right to protect workers from stress as much as possible by doing a risk assessment, a stress risk assessment, and acting on it. So what you're supposed to do is assess the risk of stress in the job and its impact on their mental and physical health in the same way you'd assess any other health and safety thing. If you have fewer than 5 workers, if you're in a tiny practice, it doesn't have to be a written thing, but it is useful to do. Anyone with more than 5 workers, which I would say was 99% of surgeries, you are required by law to have a risk assessment on stress that is done for the health and safety of your practice. And this is something that you will be asked about. If you hover over this, you'll see there is a risk assessment that will come up for you, but don't worry too much about rushing to do that now, because it will also come out to you after this event with your certificate and everything else. There will be a stress risk assessment, and you are supposed to get that done within your workplace. So employers have got to look for risk to staff, including the risk of violence. So you should have a violence risk assessment, decide how significant these risks are, what to do to prevent or control the risk, and have a plan to achieve it. We all do lots of risk assessments. This is yet another one you've got to add into your list. So let's go back to what happens when their conflict is happening. So we are now in the event. Let's have a think about what you're going to start seeing. So you're going to see Your patient who is cross, they may be very flushed and red. They may actually have gone very pale. Real anger, you often lose all the colouring in your face. Profusely sweating, pacing, repetitive movements. They may have signs of extreme fatigue if they haven't slept, black circles under the eyes, trembling, shaking, clenched jaws, clenched fists, exaggerated or violent gestures. Their voice may have changed. Some people go very, very quiet and very angry. Others shout and scream. So it could be loud talking, chanting, shallow or rapid breath, scowling, sneering, abusive language. Need to be careful with that. Again, if you're in some of the rougher areas, some people just swear every time they speak. But if it is unusual for the situation, glaring, avoiding eye contact, or violating your personal space, so they're right up in your face. But don't just focus on the patient. Look at the staff member. Are they doing this? Are they getting angry? And could this have actually been de-escalated? Could we de-escalate the staff member as well? It should often not be that one staff member is there shouting and shouting back. Sometimes someone else needs to step in. Doesn't always need to be a manager. Sometimes a different person can calm things. We need to look for other escalation signs such as threatening behaviour, someone's saying they're going to hurt someone or hurt themselves, excessive behaviour, excessive phone calls into the surgery with escalating threats. I'm going to come down, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to do something. Intimidating behaviour, argumentative or uncooperative, anger, impulsiveness, all of those sort of things, and constantly challenging people. And then we need to start de-escalating and working through how we can do that. So the first thing you need to do is think about yourself. Are you safe? Don't put yourself in harm's way. Don't get in the middle of things. Think about your breathing. Calm your breathing down. If you breathe slower, you will come across calmer. Have a few deep breaths. Try to relax your shoulders a little bit. I know it sounds mad, but if you look a bit more relaxed and calm when you go into a situation, you will definitely react better. Do tell yourself this isn't personal. Even if they're calling you names, it's not personal. They don't know you. Keep enough distance that you are safe. Be aware of your vulnerability. Don't be alone with someone, or if you have to be alone with them because of what's being discussed, make sure that someone is checking on you. Situations are that you need to be safe. Someone knows where you are. Remember, if you need to excuse yourself for a minute, that's okay. You can walk away. We are all in a situation where we're in buildings, and in those buildings, we can walk out of that building or we can walk into another room. I personally, some of you that have been on sessions before will know I've said I used to work in the airline industry many years ago when I was a lot younger. I used to flexi tie people if they really kicked off. No, you can't flexi tie them. You can't tie them to the chair. We had to do that just to keep safe that someone wasn't going to take over the aircraft. But you do need to sometimes let them rant, let them have a little shout and moan, but keep yourself safe. But look around at the area around you and make sure that it is safe for your teams, and don't take too long about it. I have a very good friend who was working in a practice, also in Central Blackpool, not my practice. And she was someone who liked to spend a lot of time thinking things over. I'm a doer, she was a thinker. And she'd spent a long time thinking about what screens to put up. This was before COVID, what screens to put up to keep her staff a bit safer. And she'd got hundreds of quotes and spent so long thinking about it that in the meantime, somebody came in with 2 very vicious dogs and picked them up and threw them over the reception desk. That receptionist was quite badly injured, will probably never work in that kind of role again through her mental health fears. And all that could have been avoided by a quicker decision to get screens up, and stop that violence happening. So sometimes, although it's great to spend a lot of time thinking and planning, sometimes doing is more important, and keep that place safe for your team. I'm sure you've all got some kind of screens up now because we had to put them up for COVID for different reasons, but make sure your staff are safe, because once something has happened, it can't unhappen. So when we're de-escalating, don't put yourself in danger and let the patient talk. Not everyone needs a solution. You don't need to come in and just give all kinds of things that could happen. Just sometimes they need to get it out of their system. So focus on them, what emotional state they're in. Can you see any triggers? If you can see something is triggering them, stop doing it. So some people really react to being called sir. Other people, it's a mark of respect. So if you notice every time you say, use a phrase like, well, sir, they get agitated. They say, call me by my first name. Then call them by their first name. Don't do things to irritate them, because that's what you normally do. Look for those triggers. Better if you can move them to a quiet place, if possible, but not so quiet you put yourself in danger. And then think about the problem, not the person. Just your knowledge and experience, can you provide a better solution? Can you think of solutions that you would do for anyone? Don't just think I'm doing it because this person is angry and shouting. They do say it's good to ask what's happened and to listen, but don't overtalk at people. Don't interrupt. Wait until they take a breath. Use their name. It can be good to use your name, but not your surname, preferably. You might have to as the manager, but your staff shouldn't have to. Show concern. Acknowledge feelings, that you can be sympathetic and acknowledge feelings without promising anything. And try to genuinely understand things from their viewpoint. Be polite, explain systems and rules and the reasons behind them, but look at who you're dealing with. If it's someone with learning disability or severe mental health, they may not want to hear all that, and you've got to judge that at the time. Try not to say no, but offer a choice if it's available, and do try to act as confidently as you can. You can also organise situations for certain patients. So, for instance, in one of my practices, we had a patient who became very, very angry about care navigation. He had severe mental health, and it triggered him whenever the receptionist asked. So we set up a system where an alert came, do not put this patient through care navigation. It's important to just give him an appointment. He didn't call often, but we had an agreement that he only saw one doctor. But if that doctor wasn't in, he would have to wait for 2-3 weeks possibly. But that was the best solution to stop his anger rising. And he would just be given the next available appointment without us knowing why. We only have one patient like that in that particular surgery, but to stop having that care navigation questions for him stopped him coming down and shouting and yelling at the surgery. So it was a win-win. So if you only have 1 or 2 really, really challenging patients, you can work around that. Clearly, when I worked in my more violent surgery, that wouldn't have been possible because we probably had 12,000 patients that were like that. So we had to just work with it on a day-by-day basis. When things go too far, with the whole team. If you haven't got time for a formal debrief, and that could be a week away before you get everyone together, then just do an informal small debrief to let the person get out their feelings if they've been particularly upset. Do you need to think about if accident reports need to be completed, risk assessments need doing for anything that went wrong, and signposting your staff. It's okay to not be okay is basically what we need to do. And we have got a slide on here with links, and we do have some paperwork on where you can report your staff to. So the first time a patient misbehaves, we probably all try to look at mitigating circumstances if it's unusual for them. Speak to different colleagues who may give you an idea whether we need to do things, because not everything is necessarily immediately straight to guns and doing something about it. Sometimes people can just make a mistake. It is also worth looking and watching at what's going on with people, because sometimes signs of dementia can show through with some mildly violent behaviour at the beginning. And this could be something to flag up to doctors if you're aware that things are changing within a person's psyche. The really repeat offenders, or those with no excuse, we'll need to manage. So we do need to think about things though. So using bad language or swearing at practice staff, there is a big difference between swearing at your staff and someone that F's and Jeffs every other sentence, but that's just the way they speak. If they are swearing at your staff in a threatening manner, that definitely needs dealing with. You are not going to go into a really deprived, really challenging area and stop anyone ever saying swear words, because sometimes that's the only way they speak. Racial abuse, never ever to be ignored, but we do need to be very careful these days. There is a very big difference between somebody using an inappropriate way to describe the colour of somebody's skin as opposed to being racist, because when people are getting very old and they have dementia, sometimes things that were acceptable 30, 40 years ago is not an acceptable word now, and they would be horrified that you thought they were being racist. Sometimes they just use slightly inappropriate words, and we need to have our staff understanding and knowing the difference. That's also the same with how we refer to people as with he, she, they. Sometimes even as we get to my age, we get confused and we don't always know the correct pronoun to use. That doesn't mean necessarily someone's being abusive. It may mean they've just got it wrong. So we need to really differentiate between what is someone being abusive and what is someone that really doesn't get all the different pronouns or the most up-to-date phrases we're supposed to use. And that's more a gentle chat with that person, rather than immediately trying to throw them off the list and having them put in with the violent patient scheme when perhaps they've said something that was acceptable 5 years ago and not now. So we've just got to be sensible. Sexual harassment in the workplace, very difficult when it's a patient, but it does need dealing with. Persistent or unrealistic service demands causing damage to practice premises, stealing from the practice, or obtaining drugs and medical services fraudulently. All of those things do need reporting or having an initial warning sent out. If you want to remove someone from your list, it's normally much easier if a warning's been sent out. So that's why I always tell my team, even if something doesn't seem that bad, make sure I'm aware so they can have that initial warning to say, actually calling the doctor by what was a racist comment is not acceptable, and if you do it again, you will be removed. This is the kind of thing that we need to start warning people early on so that we can remove them when things come really bad without having to have that backward and forward fight, because we've already put plans in place. If you want to remove someone from your patient list, it's normally you need to have had that warning within 12 months before, unless you feel that it's just too bad, they've done something absolutely horrific, and then you can go on an immediate removal. So there are warning letters that you can do. There are also these patient agreements that you can have. Like I mentioned, we have the agreement with someone, we wouldn't go through care navigation. It doesn't always work. Works with some patients, not with others, and it can be used alongside your warning letters. And we are going to send out some examples for you. But that's something that you can have a look at and see if they work for you. At the moment, we still have 8-day removals. Things are changing all the time under the new contract. So if you're watching a recorded version of this, that may have completely changed. So for that 8-day removal, we need to see that there's been a warning in the past, and we can look at that, and we should be discussing that with our GPs to make sure they are our GP partners, to make sure they're happy with that. To go down. If you're using breakdown of doctor-patient relationship as a reason for removal, you might want to take a little bit of advice on that. It doesn't always get accepted, depending on what the breakdown of relationship is. The immediate removals will be on the grounds of violence or threatened violence. They might be then sent to the special allocation scheme, but they may not be anymore. Danielle, you've put, do warning letters have expiry dates? Basically, you need to have a warning letter within the year leading up to you removing them. So if you said we sent a warning letter 8 years ago, that wouldn't count. It needs to be within the 12 months before. But I wouldn't keep warning someone if they keep misbehaving, they need out. There have been changes in the new contract for people won't automatically go on the special allocation scheme if they have been violent, and that's because people were getting a bit too happy moving everyone onto that scheme that perhaps wasn't appropriate to be on that scheme. People who really weren't violent but were just annoying. So now, if you've got to have lots of documented records why you want to remove them, but you've got to think of it a bit like prison, where when somebody has come out of prison, good behaviour can allow them to reapply. So if you've had good behaviour in prison, you're let out early. Well, good behaviour when you've been removed from a surgery, they can reapply within 2 years to come back to your surgery unless you've got really good reason. You cannot refuse that because that will go against your policies for registration. So you can throw someone off, they can end up on the violent patient scheme, and 2 years later you can get them right back. But these new rules that have come out within the new contract, people won't go on to the special allocation scheme before it's gone through a board who's looked at actually what they've done to decide. So you may throw someone off your list thinking they're violent, and they may end up in a practice that's in your building. If you have a shared building, they could end up in the next practice along and working out of that practice because the circumstances don't warrant them going on to the special allocation scheme. So you need to be really aware of that. Some of that could depend on, for instance, I've had somebody removed because of repeated bad behaviour. It was sort of not violent, but threats of violence, including threats of violence to myself. And that was because he had a long-term relationship with one of the staff members that had then broken up, and he took it out on everybody. And he went to another practice. There was no reason for him to be violent there because he wasn't angry at anyone there. So it was deemed that he didn't need to go to the SAS scheme. It can be hard when you feel that things have been really awful, but unfortunately that is the rules. We need to have policies and be very careful about removing children or young people who are on a protection order or a child protection plan. So you can't deregister them because perhaps they're DNAing, because that's down to the parents and parents' responsibility. And you're not supposed to remove people with learning disabilities on the grounds of behaviour. Now, I have challenged that. That is the legal stance. I have challenged that when we had a gentleman with learning disabilities who was physically attacking my staff. And I challenged it. Yes, they went to the special allocation scheme in the end. So even though they had a learning disability, I could not leave my staff in danger. So sometimes if you need to challenge a rule, I would strongly suggest you challenge a rule. So the changes in the 2025 contract about removals is the process to remove a violent patient has apparently become easier. I don't know that that's exactly true, but it's supposed to become easier, and instead of them keep pushing back and pushing back, so those immediate removals that end up taking days because sometimes they don't do it immediately, has supposed to have changed. But if a relationship has broken down, but there is no violence, patient choice must be maintained for the next practice. So they're not just sent to another practice. And a police report containing a patient will not always mean the patient needs to go onto the SAS scheme. They may be able to choose another practice. The SAS scheme doesn't cover invading another person's personal space, so getting right up into your face, feeling threatened with that, shouting or banging on the reception desk, behaviour that you wouldn't normally report to the police, or incidents that occur outside the practice. So if a patient has been abusive to their carers in hospital, and there's a hospital-based incident, that doesn't mean that you can remove them from your practice. And the special allocation scheme does not provide for the treatment of family members of patients allocated to the scheme, so you can't just remove the entire family. That's got to be on a case-by-case basis. It can be really challenging if you've got a carer or a relative who's not actually registered at your practice that comes in and is abusive, because removing them from your practice isn't possible. Anyone had to deal with this? Want to put anything in the chat about dealing with and how you've managed one? While you're thinking, and if anyone wants to add anything to the chat about dealing with that, I'll tell you about a situation that actually resulted in a court case where we had a very threatening man who used to bring his mother in. He had been removed from the practice, but he wanted to continue bringing his mother in for her appointments, where he would be abusive continually to staff, damage cars, do all sorts of stuff. The police were involved. We ended up having to have an agreement with his mother to say that she had to get somebody else to bring her to her appointments, or we would have to delist her. And luckily she did that, because I don't know how that would have gone if that had been challenged through NHS England, because we could not necessarily delist her over her son's behaviour. Nobody got any situations they want to share in the chat? No? Can often happen with when you've got two parents, one of whom who are split quite often, and the child has to be brought in by a parent who is not registered at your practice, that has got aggressive. That's happened in quite a few occasions, and that can be really challenging. And then you can have parental agreements where only, for instance, the mother brings someone in. It is not always the man that is aggressive. Just for your awareness, if you have a special allocation scheme patient, not parent, that was the wording I was just using, who attempts to register with a normal GP practice, you won't necessarily get a message, it comes up straight away, but as soon as that goes via GP link to PCSE, you will get an email telling you that patient hasn't been attached to your practice. PCSE will reject the registration with a rejection note saying that the patient's on the SAS scheme, and the patient will be contacted by PCSE to tell them they can only be seen by the special allocation scheme. So there is a bit of a fail-safe in there. So I've got a couple of you have now added in. So Rachel, who said you've got family members being aggressive, not the patient. Yeah, it is really challenging. And Lindsay, who has had an abusive patient who threw the contents of a bottle over the reception scheme, unable to identify the patient for some time, eventually attended again and identified. It's out there, and they are pretty awful. And we can understand how our staff can feel absolutely terrified when these things are happening around them. So we do need to be looking after our team and looking after ourselves in those situations. You are a practice manager. You are not Superman or Superwoman who is there to swoop in and sort out all the problems. And you are definitely not paid enough to put yourself in danger. Definition of violence at work is the Health and Safety Executive, so that's the HSE, defines work-related violence as any incident in which a person is abused, threatened, or assaulted in circumstances relating to their work. So this can be verbal abuse, threats, face-to-face, online and via the telephone, physical attacks, violence from members of the public, clients, patients, service users, and students towards a person at work. Gosh, I haven't had students being that abusive. And the ones that you've got to actually report to the HSE are work-related violence that results in death. Well, one would hope you would be reporting that anyway. A specified injury, a physical injury to a worker. That means they are unable to carry out their normal duties for more than 7 days. So if you have someone who is being verbally abused or has had a slight injury or a stress-based injury and feels stressed, not so a mental injury rather than a physical injury, as a manager, you do not need to report to HSE about any of those things. You do need to deal with them, but you don't need to report them. But we do need to report anything that basically is a physical illness. So if somebody has been pushed over and injured themselves by a patient and they can't carry out their duties for 7 days or more, that means that has to go to HSE. And we have to actually put those reports in. But you should be recording everything that happens. Investigate them, do a significant event, definitely. And then reapply a new risk assessment on what has just happened, because we do need to look and make sure we are controlling things that go horribly wrong. You need to show your staff you're taking violence seriously and you are backing them up. Can be made in an accident book, a reporting form for incidents, whatever works, and depending on what has actually happened. And as soon as your employees have gone through something that is particularly stressful for them, like violence at work, you should be doing a stress risk assessment to make sure that everything is right. And we need to look after our staff after these kind of incidents. So they can really impact workers who are directly involved and those who witness an incident. It can affect their mental and their physical health. Victims are going to react on different ways. Sometimes people just don't show any outward signs of reaction. They are quietly breaking inside, and we need to be mindful of that. It's not just the person in the corner shouting and screaming or crying. It is everyone that's involved in a situation. You may need to consider changing a person's job role or their working conditions. You need to be sensitive. You need to offer confidential counselling. Look at local things like victim support that we can offer to people. And there are lots of links to support available from NHS England while we still have it. So it is worth going through these links and trying to offer some support to all of our teams and what they might need going forward. There are regulatory requirements such as CQC, where we may need to let them know if things have happened with police involvement. But I would think very carefully and speak to your local CQC representative to see exactly what they mean by that, because we certainly used to have police involvement in our Blackpool surgery constantly. And I think if CQC were informed every time the police showed up, they would soon get sick of us. So we used to report the more aggressive situations. But that's something that you will need to work with your local providers. So your actions after today, and actually all the actions aren't written here because it's a changing situation. So actions that are written on here: remove all references if you can for zero tolerance and look at more really talking about violence reduction instead. And have a violence reduction policy. Share this with your team. Make sure you've got enough staff whenever possible. People aren't lone working. Make sure you have all your risk assessments done of the workplace and the staff and put in solutions. Think about your space, your layout, your staff security. Are your staff safe at work? Think about those posters we looked at. Is there anything up there that's going to be offensive, that is already upsetting people? And is there a more gentle way of doing it? Try to teach your staff how to react or calm down those who are being abusive. I would always recommend, if you can get them on the staff version of this training. That's really good, that they can then learn how to de-escalate themselves, and design your work environment to reduce the risk of violence. Do encourage your staff to report all violent incidents, and they should know how to do that. And definitely get them writing their own significant events afterwards. Bring all your staff together for a debriefing and discuss what's happened. Ensure your staff feel supported when reporting an incident. Have handover briefings for recordings and exchanging information about patients. So that means if somebody's going home at lunchtime and Mr. Smith has already phoned up and said, I'm really angry, I'm coming down and I'm going to bring a hammer with me to the surgery, do remember to tell the staff that are starting at lunchtime that there are threats of violence coming down. Ensure your staff have access to physical and mental health support and collect and monitor data. It is also important. Now, we've had a terrorist situation only a few weeks ago in the Manchester area, where we need to learn how to react to those situations, because these are very stressful for our staff. This might not be a patient coming in and being violent. This is something happening outside the surgery, but in view of the surgery. We need to know how to lock down our premises to keep our staff safe. We need to know how to look after our staff when these incidents have happened, because we need to be considering terrorism now, not just regular violence that happens, but terrorism that could be happening outside our surgery. And then we need to learn how to help our staff remain resilient after these events have happened. Because of the events that happened in Manchester, GP Excellence spoke to their board and organised some future training that we are going to be looking at. That training is about resilience for managers, resilience for practice staff. The resilience for practice staff is going to be in the format of a video that you can utilise. This should be available in January. You'll be able to take that video on a PLT afternoon. It will also save you some time and save you working through lots of stuff, because you can put that video on and your staff will be taught through resilience and how to keep themselves resilient in this kind of job, which helps calm things down because they know that you are looking after them. There is going to be a January version of the business continuity plan that includes training, which is going to include some extra work, about an extra 20 minutes in there, in locking down your premises to keep you safe in an attack. That could be terrorism going on outside. It could be a patient threatening to come down with a knife or a hammer and you need to lock down. And there is also going to be an informative video that is going to be made on locking down your premises as a drill. So somewhat like we have fire drills where we get everyone to go outside, we have looked at the fact that, for instance, in schools in America, all the kids go through school shooter training and what to do by having drills. So we are going to go through how to put together a drill for your practice and lock down your practice to make sure that your staff know what to do in those situations, because the more you practice, the easier it's going to be for them. All of that should be available from January from GP Excellence, and will be in formats of videos and training for you all. So hopefully that will help you in those violent situations and knowing how to respond to a much further form of conflict that may be happening now all around us, because we have to know how to react to those very challenging, very serious situations as well. Long ago was the job for practice managers simply to run whoever's working on that day, looking at staff lists and maybe doing a little bit of bookkeeping. It's a very serious management job now with a lot of health and safety in there, and we need you to be able to look after your teams, but you also need to look after you, which is why we brought in resilience for practice managers as well, to make sure that you keep going and you can keep managing to do the job with the support that you need. There are lots of links for managers that I've popped on there on the screen, but also these slides are going to come out to you, I believe, so that you will have that possibility and you'll have all those links sent out to you. So what happens after today is you will get a certificate of attendance, you will get a series of different documents that will come out to you to hopefully help you set up your stress risk assessments and all of that good stuff that we've talked about, and you'll have all those links ready for your staff to help you through that. And hopefully just that bit of learning has been useful for you to know how to back up your staff and assist them when they are going through these areas of conflict without putting yourself through tremendous danger. And sometimes that bit of understanding about what's going on through your patients' heads can really help them to understand, your staff to understand maybe what's going on, and perhaps have a little bit more sympathy sometimes with things, but without actually putting themselves in any form of danger, because they really need to be kept safe in the workplace, which is our duty as managers to make sure that happens. I'm hoping today's been useful. It is time for questions, if anybody has any questions on today. No questions? Okay, well, if you don't have any questions, I'm really hoping, as I say, it was useful, and a video has been made of today, which is going to be available from GP Excellence when they pop it onto their website. So you will be free to look at that video or to get all of the instant stuff that's coming and all of those other things we talked about with the lockdown drill video, the resilience for your practice staff, and the longer business continuity session that will be available in January for going over lockdown procedures if you're in a terrorist situation. So hopefully all of those things will be helpful for you. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to stop the recording and allow you to continue with your day. I can see the sun slowly coming out. Thank you for today.